Today, Lori Vallow Daybell committed the cardinal sin of trial law, something a jury will not forgive, something that is incredibly hard to come back from. And she did it in her own murder trial. She's representing herself in charges she conspired to help her brother, Alex Cox, murder her husband, Charles Vallow. And what she did today may seem really small, but it's something that's really hard to come back from because it's just something every wise trial lawyer desperately wants to avoid. She bored the jury. She wasted their time, and that is an unpardonable sin in a courtroom. Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. When I started practicing law, there were no cell phones and YouTube. There was no YouTube. YouTube didn't exist. TikTok was something that your clock did down the hall. And even then, this rule held true that as a lawyer, your job has always been to make every second in the courtroom matter. But today that is amplified many times over because jurors now live in the world we all live in where there is constant stimulation. There are phones, there's streaming, games, emails, family, jobs. And so they have options, other things that would be more entertaining and interesting. Sitting through a rambling, pointless cross-examination is not something that they take kindly to. It will definitely make them upset and make them feel like the person is wasting their time. That is absolutely unacceptable. And the trial lawyers have one job, and that's to make every moment in the courtroom count, to only ask questions that move the ball forward, and to only show evidence that helps your case, to cut absolutely everything else ruthlessly. That's why we go through every document that the other side produces, and you only pick out the ones that actually count. We take depositions and we ask all the really pointless, meaningless, nitty-gritty questions, and then at trial, only ask the ones that really count, that really matter. That's what all of that discovery is leading up to, is to making sure that the time the jury spends in the courtroom is well spent, that it's all designed specifically to help the jury decide the case, not in any way to waste their time. So when you contrast Lori's sort of meandering approach with what the state's been doing, it's very jarring because they're in stark contrast. The state has been busy proving, for example, that all the signs suggest that nobody gave Charles CPR before emergency personnel arrived, because blood should have been everywhere if someone had tried CPR on someone with two, at least, gunshot wounds. But instead, it was only pooled under Charles Vallow. It wasn't pooled around him. There should have been an impression in the skin at the sternum after CPR was administered, but there wasn't. EMT should not have heard that crack sound that apparently happens when you first start CPR, because supposedly someone else was already doing it. In fact, Charles even had lividity, the state witnesses have said, which is sort of a pooling of blood on the part of the body that's lowest. So he was lying on his back, so on his back side. And that would suggest that Charles's heart had not been beating for some time. They haven't specified exactly how long that would take. But all told, emergency personnel have concluded that all signs suggested that nobody bothered to give Charles CPR before they got there. And yet, Alex Cox, Lori's brother, told 911 there he was performing CPR on Charles. And Lori arrives at the scene and they show that. And she doesn't ask one question about what happened or how is her husband or where is he even? Here's Alex, where's her husband? See, it was so odd, in fact, that one of the first responders concluded, well, she just clearly had no idea that her husband had just been killed, because she was smiling and, she was friendly and she made some jokes about, oh, wow, what must the neighbors think? I mean, we just moved in 3 weeks ago. I guess we're not going to be invited to the neighborhood pool party, things like that. And it wasn't just sort of sloppy behavior. It paints a very damning picture. The state's been putting all of these facts out there. And in this picture, no one in the house seems to be at all concerned about whether Charles Vallow lived or died. No one seems to even be thinking about it. It looks like they wanted him dead. That's the state's point in bringing this. And then you contrast this with Lori's courtroom performance. I'm going to show you some clips to show you what I'm talking about. She is not engaging with the real issues in the case. A lot of times her questions go nowhere. Sometimes it almost seems like she's just curious, like she's just having a chat somewhere in a coffee shop with somebody, and not like she's defending herself in a murder trial. And jurors do not have patience with those sorts of things. They are not there for curiosity. They are there to decide the case. That's what they want to do. So I did a little clip of some things that happened today that I wanted you to see that I think will show you what I'm talking about. So let's add this to the
into your treatment, I should say. Did you guys stop and do the heart monitor?
I would estimate that the monitor probably was on within 2 minutes of making patient contact.
Okay. And how long does that take?
To do what? To put it on?
Well, to put it on, get a reading, and decide what you're going to do next.
It could take, you got to turn it on, open up a compartment to get the pads out of that compartment. You've got to open that packaging to be able to apply it to the patient's chest area. If the chest is wet, which there's some blood, you need to dry that so it's going to adhere more properly, read more properly. So you could be looking at 30 seconds to a minute possibly of working through that.
Okay. And did you have to do that in this case, is remove blood to stick them on?
I would assume so, but I was doing chest compressions, so that would have been one of the other two firefighters kind of working through that.
So remember this, at the time that the EMTs arrived, at the time all the medical personnel arrived, the people who were treating him say Charles Vallow was already dead. The prosecution says Lori and Alex made sure of that they waited to even call. So the length of time that it took to put on the leads, none of that is really going to be relevant because he's been, according to the state's case, he's been there for a while. The problem is not that they were slow putting leads on him and it took them a while to get around to giving him CPR. The problem is how long it took Lori and Alex to call to ask for help. So the question is any of this really important to her case? Is proving that it took a while to put on the leads, anything like that, does that matter? Is that going to help the jury decide her case? So the point she has to be focused on is, does the jury care about this because it will help the jury make a decision in my case?
I was able to see my testimony from Idaho. I was able to see my testimony with Chandler PD when they came to the fire station a couple of weeks after this incident.
And what paper documentation did you actually take a look at?
It would have been the chart that Captain Keller documented.
And what does that chart consist of?
There would be scene times, date, time, address, patient information, name, address, maybe medical history, things that a narrative of what we discovered, what we've done, treatments that we've done. The heart rhythm from the monitor gets attached to it.
So that would all be in Captain Keller's report?
Correct.
And you did take a look at that in preparation for today?
Yes.
So it may be that Lori has seen other lawyers ask some questions about maybe whether someone has looked at a report or what was contained in a report. But hopefully the lawyer only did that if the point mattered. The jury doesn't really care about what is listed in a report, all the little details, like what exactly is on that form. That isn't important to them because it isn't going to help them make a decision. Now, if she has some bombshell information that they left off, I don't know, patient information, or they left off the date and there was some reason that was a cover up by the police, that would be one thing. But just in general, listing what's on the form without taking it anywhere is super frustrating for the jury, because they're looking for the points that will help them get somewhere, not just the points that are just lawyers, and in this case, the defendant representing herself talking.
And did you write a report regarding this incident?
No,
You don't have to document anything?
just one person documents the call.
So for all of the people that were there from fire?
Correct.
Okay. So that's the total report, is you just give your input to him and he puts it into the report?
Correct.
And that's the same for the other two firefighters that were along with you?
That's correct.
Okay. So they don't have their own individual reports as well?
No.
Okay. What time were you dismissed from the scene?
Let me stop right there and just say, so you might in discovery ask some questions when the jury isn't there, but we're in trial. This is not the time for just general informational stuff. This is the time for actually presenting facts that matter, facts that will move the needle. And she never sort of suggests what any of the significance of this is. As far as I can tell, at least so far, it doesn't have any significance. All of these little details just are unimportant and irrelevant to the jury. It's not just asking questions to ask questions. It's asking questions for a purpose and to get somewhere. And that's, I think, what's going to frustrate the jury about all of this. So is there a missing report? Is there some big contradiction? Any of those things might matter, but we aren't seeing any of that. We're only seeing a bunch of sort of what seem to be irrelevant, nonsensical questions about little details, and they're not actually helping convince the jury of anything.
I mean, we probably only remained an additional 5 to 10 minutes. The chart would have that time. I don't necessarily have it by memory.
So how long were you at the scene total? Like,
If I had to estimate without looking at it, I would say approximately 20, 25 minutes.
okay. And then you were like the driver of the truck, right? Was that your responsibility? So you drove in, and then did you drive out as well?
Correct.
Okay.
Like,
So if you guys,
does that matter at all? That he was the driver doesn't matter. If it actually there was some important reason for asking that question, then by all means do. But just to find out whether he was the driver that day isn't probably going to help the jury.
arrived around 8:41 or something like that, then you left around 25 minutes later? Would that be accurate?
I guess when I was giving that estimate of like the 2025, I was even including like our dispatch time from the time we're dispatched driving to the scene. So if you're wanting to know actual on scene time, it might be closer, instead of the 20 to 25, it might be more of a closer to 20 solid. Like
20 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. And is that typical for a call?
It can vary depending on the calls.
Okay.
It's possible that the reason Lori is asking these questions is because the prosecutor asked a lot of questions about exactly how long it took people to get to the scene, how long from the time of the 911 call until the people who could do emergency treatment for Alex arrived. In other words, how long did Charles Vallow, for Charles Vallow, how long that would take. And that is relevant to the question of whether or not he could have lived with CPR, about whether or not they took so long that maybe he died while everybody was waiting for emergency personnel to arrive on scene. But for Lori to ask it, that's not her battle to fight, at least not in proving how quickly they got there. She's just asking sort of randomly about how long it takes them to do particular tasks in their job. If lividity occurred, which is what the witnesses testified to today, then it could not have occurred in the brief period of time it took law enforcement to arrive. I imagine we'll have an expert who will say that. As of right now, it's not something that anybody's really testified to, but I imagine when the coroner gets there, that's what we'll hear about. But so the question is, why are these questions relevant? Well, why is Lori asking these questions? Like, how does this help her and help her case? She doesn't explain it, and it's not clear to me how it would help. Let me say thank you to a few people. Magali is asking me, what if Lori fired the second shot? Lori's the only person alive who knows more than all witnesses, law enforcement, or prosecution. See, she's the only person left alive who was there that day. Charles Vallow killed, Alex Cox dead, JJ, Tylee, their bodies found in Chad Daybell's backyard. So she is definitely the only person left who can answer any questions about what happened. Did she fire the second shot? I have no idea. I don't think there's going to be evidence of that from the state, but I don't know. It's an important question, obviously, but I don't think that the state believes that because they haven't charged her with first-degree murder. They've just charged her with conspiracy. So my guess is they suspect Alex Cox did it, or at least that's all they think they have the proof for. Denise, first of all, thanks, Denise. I appreciate it. And yes, please like and subscribe. I always forget to say that. So thank you, Denise. I really appreciate your saying that. And we would appreciate it if you would hit the like button and subscribe. Lynette, thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate it. Glad to have you following along. And Lynn has been a member for 5 months, but been here longer than that. Thanks for watching, and thank you. I'm glad you enjoy the streams. So let's listen a little bit more to what she said at trial today.
So what other things did you do in that 20 minutes besides administer to the patient?
So I'm including in that time while we're staged around the corner, waiting for PD to arrive, then for PD to clear the scene, for us to drive to the scene. There's the time with the patient, and then there's going to be the cleanup afterwards. Removing our equipment, going outside. Maybe the equipment needs to be cleaned, restocked, ready for another call. So when we drive away, we're ready to respond to another emergency and then drive away.
Okay. So when you were done with the patient and you were going through that procedure of cleaning, were you in the house or did you exit the house?
We'll remove all of our stuff and we'll go outside, typically to the front bumper of the fire truck.
And then what do you do?
We have cleaning chemicals on the truck that we could get out to, clean our equipment up to reuse it. We've got cabinet with restock to be able to restock anything that might need to be. So we'll take care of those things to be ready to respond to another call.
Do you see what I mean? That none of this is helping the jury. None of this is what at least a seasoned, experienced trial lawyer would want to present to the jury, because all of this is just sort of window dressing. None of it has anything to do with whether or not Lori Vallow Daybell conspired to murder Charles Vallow. And that's what the jury's there for. They don't want to waste their time. So you almost get the impression that Lori is asking questions because she thinks she should. And I do get it in a sense, because she may feel like her Idaho attorneys didn't ask enough questions. And I certainly felt like that. I felt like they didn't anywhere near enough engage with the witnesses and in cross-examination. But she still should only ask questions that help her. And she shouldn't do any questions that are irrelevant. And I think the jury will be very frustrated with her very quickly.
Okay.
And actually, you're going to see the jury is not the only person in the room who's going to get frustrated.
While you were out front, did you see Alex on the curb?
I did see somebody on the curb, or I don't remember if he was on the curb or standing, but I remember seeing somebody with an officer or officers. I don't recall how many people might have been together.
Okay. And did you converse with those officers at all during that time?
I don't believe so. I don't really remember conversing with any officers on scene. That would have been more Captain Keller, charting, documenting, kind of getting information from them. He would be able to answer that question.
Okay. So did you,
She wants another question.
Was anybody in firefighting on your team, the 4 of you that were there, was anyone asked to take a look at Alex?
We were not.
So in this segment, that right there was the only question that mattered. The only one that mattered. Was he asked to look at Alex? But frankly, it's a little bit ambiguous. So it's not really clear whether Lori Vallow Daybell is helped by that or hurt by that. Because think of it this way. If Alex Cox was really badly hurt, that would help her because she claims that Charles Vallow hit Alex with a baseball bat. And that's why Alex Cox went and got a gun and shot him. It's because of the baseball bat and the fear about that. But in this case, Alex was bleeding some, but he wasn't bleeding a lot. And one of the things the prosecution has pointed out is there wasn't some huge amount of blood, either for that matter, around Charles to suggest CPR, but there wasn't a huge amount of blood from Alex's head where he claimed to have been hit by a former, at least, what do you call that when they're not major league, minor league? I don't know. Field team. There we go. Field team baseball player. And so why didn't he have a lot more blood? Why wasn't he a lot hurt much worse by someone who had such a baseball background hitting him with a baseball bat? It seems like that would be something that would cause a significant injury, but it wasn't significant enough that anyone at the scene thought that Alex needed to be treated. So on the one hand, it kind of helps Lori that no one was asked to treat him because maybe they would have found something. If only they had treated him, maybe they would have realized how serious his head injury was. On the other hand, it kind of goes in the other direction, which is maybe the reason no one was asked to look at his injury is because it wasn't really a big deal. No one there thought it even really mattered all that much. So at long last, after this section here, the prosecutor has had enough. And I left these pauses in.
Have you spoken to the media about this case?
Let me stop that because I interrupted it. But I left the pauses in because I want you to understand sort of what the jury is seeing. And what they're seeing is some long pauses and a lot of irrelevant questions. So let me back this up just a little bit so you can hear that part again.
Have you spoken to the media about this case?
I'm going to object. Relevance?
What's the relevance?
What is the relevance, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Just to know how many times he's given testimony?
Your Honor, I'm
Right.
going
I'm gonna
to, maybe
just-
we can
hold on.
sidebar.
Yeah, I don't want to. All right, let's go on a sidebar.
How far into your...
Let's stop it there. Clearly, Lori Vallow Daybell didn't really have a response on how this was relevant. Either she hadn't thought about it or she didn't know the answer. She maybe didn't have a reason why it was relevant. The fire department talking to the media, very, very unlikely to be relevant. And she doesn't come up with any explanation for why or how it is. She even had trouble articulating a single reason to the judge when she got asked about it. Also, talking to the media would not be testimony. It might be something that could be used, but it wouldn't have anything to do with testimony. So saying she wanted to know how many times he testified, it doesn't even fit with that. She really seems to have trouble separating just asking questions to make sure you have something to say when you stand up there to find and just questions that find out some fact randomly from and distinguishing that from asking questions that will help the jury make a decision in this particular case and that will give the jury facts and perspective that will help the jury conclude that the state has not proven Lori is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That's her whole job here. As her own attorney, that's what her job is to give the jury facts and perspective to show that the state has not proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. If the fire department talked to the media, would that help prove that? She can't articulate a single reason or way that it would have. So for the prosecutor has had enough at that point. Objects. You heard the judge start to say, the judge was going to say, sustain, that's totally irrelevant. Why are we talking about this? And probably has been wanting that objection for the last 5 minutes. But at this point, before he does that, the prosecutor says, let's have a sidebar. Somebody sent me a question the other night about the fact that people keep wearing headphones. Suddenly, Lori Vallow Daybell, the prosecutor, the judge, they'll all put on headphones. What's happening is that Lori Vallow Daybell is not able, because she is a convicted felon, a convicted murderer, she's not able to approach the bench. That would be too risky. The sheriff's department wouldn't want that. So as a result, in order for them to hold the typical sidebar, instead of everybody walking up to the bench and talking in a little huddle, what they're doing is talking with some noise played in the courtroom, but they're talking on these headphones so they can communicate with one another without other people hearing it. That's how a sidebar is being done in this particular case. So in this whole day, the problem is that Lori really seemed to be unable to focus in on what would help her in the case. And she's asking a lot of irrelevant fluff that is going to drive the jury nuts, because they don't want to spend 6 weeks here. And they especially don't want to spend 6 weeks here if what they're doing is listening to someone talk about how, what different equipment they have on their EMT vehicle. They don't care. They want to know, did Lori conspire to murder Charles Vallow? And they want the focus to be on that. And they want the questions to be about that. And when she asks other stuff, it's going to make them, after a while, they will get more and more frustrated. Just as you heard the judge, he was ready to sustain that objection. And then the prosecutor wanted a sidebar. They may well have talked to Lori about, here's what relevance means. Here's why you should limit your questions here. And hopefully her advisory council will give her the same advice. I don't know whether she really cares to follow that. What we heard in that interview that she did this over the weekend with, I believe it was called Arizona Family. One of the things she said was that the reason she was there was, and the reason she was representing herself in part was because she kept asking her other attorneys to ask questions and they wouldn't do it. And she got that, but she wanted to be able to ask those questions. So she may be focused on particular ideas or themes that are irrelevant. The jury won't care about them. The judge may sustain objections to them. They are only important to her. They are not important to deciding the case. Very, very frustrating issue for lots of people. All right, I've got some people to thank. I'll take a very few questions. I want to keep this video pretty short. Josh saying, Lori, need to learn, don't ask questions you don't already know the answer to. That's a classic rule for trial lawyers, is when you ask a question, you should already know the answer. You should have asked it in discovery. You should have a document that proves the point that you can impeach the witness with. Whatever you ask, you need to know where you're going. You don't just throw it out there. You do, and Josh is right. You confuse yourself, you annoy the jury. Classic rule for trial lawyers. Scar Motley and me says, glad Papa Lawyer Lee is better. Me too. He is home from the hospital. So that's why we were late with our live stream tonight. I typically go live at 7 p.m. Eastern, but had to wait so we could get discharged and bring him home. So he is all better. In fact, we're not really sure there was ever anything wrong, but something was wrong. They never did really figure out any reason for that. So thank you. I appreciate that very much. Nicole, she seems to ask questions she doesn't know the answer to, possibly to figure out what to ask next. I think that's exactly right. I don't think she knows the answer to these. I don't think, if she sat and thought about it, she might realize she doesn't even really care about the answer. It's more just informational. Hey, curious, how does your job go as emergency personnel here in Chandler, Arizona? What do you do on a daily basis? It doesn't help the case, but she just throws that out there, I think, because she really wants to ask a question. Walkaway Renee is a new member. Welcome. We are so glad to have you. And Violinist is also a new member. So glad to have both of you. We will be having, actually, we were going to have our next members only live stream this Thursday. I'm kind of behind because of the hospitalization thing for my dad. So we're going to be putting that off. We'll probably do it Monday night instead of Thursday night. So Sorry about the delay on that. We are writing a true crime novel, and it has been so much fun. We're doing polls and people are throwing in ideas, and we figured out we're kind of getting some criteria where it's going to be AI assisted, and we are just having an absolute blast. If you attended one of our sessions, put in the chat tell people how much fun it was, because I think they'll be interested to hear. All right, so I am going to go backwards a ways. I should have gone over. Oh, and I did forget to say, please put question marks at the beginning of your question. That'll really help me spot it in the chat much more easily. Okay, so I'm going to see about where I was. I'm going to guess okay, we'll start with Phyllis. What is the role of advisory counsel? So the idea behind advisory counsel is Lori Vallow Daybell is not an attorney, but she's representing herself, but sometimes she might have legal questions. It'd be a good idea to have a lawyer there who could advise her, not take over the case, not run the case, but just give her advice. Like, here's what that means if she has questions. So it's sort of a bridge between someone representing themselves and forcing them to have a lawyer, but they aren't forced to have a lawyer. They aren't forced to ask questions of this person, but it's available. She does seem to have at least listened to them some. When we saw that interview this weekend, there seemed to be someone off camera talking to Lori, and several times they would turn the sound off. You could see everybody turn as someone else spoke off screen, and then they would turn back and she would not answer that question. So it appeared what was happening was somebody off screen was giving her advice. Yeah, don't answer that. That would be my advice to you. So she seemed to be listening to her advisory counsel, at least for that. I assume that's who was giving her the advice. I don't know who else would have been permitted to be present. Okay, so did they lose another juror today? They did. And they almost lost 2 more. This is very precarious. Only having... if I have my numbers right, I believe they had 12 jurors, 4 alternates, and they've lost 2. Sorry, they've lost 2, and they almost lost 2 more. So that's crazy. That is very terrifying when you're trying a case, because if you end up doing that, everything down the drain. Now, maybe the law in Arizona would permit them to reach an agreement that, okay, yeah, we'll just proceed with 11. But I don't know. In a murder case, I'm guessing that would be highly questionable. Murder case where the defendant is representing herself, I wouldn't want to do it if I were the judge. I'd say we probably got to start over. But can you imagine? After all this work, it would be appalling. Irene, are those the same headphones used for court interpreting? I do not know. That's an interesting question, Irene. I've never seen this system used before. I think it's sort of a unique situation where you've got the defendant representing herself, the defendant already convicted of felonies. The defendant can't approach the bench. And in fact, most defendants on a murder trial wouldn't be allowed to approach the bench. So here they are trying to figure out how they're going to allow these objections to be at sidebar. How do they do it? And this is a pretty clever way, I think, that they've come up with. All right, if Lori is found not guilty here, do you think they will drop the other murder case? Interesting question, Deborah asks. The second trial that is slated to come next in May is the trial for her conspiracy for assault against Brandon Boudreaux. Someone shot at Brandon Boudreaux from the back of an SUV. Lori her family had a similar SUV, and Lori was seen placing the back seat of an SUV into a storage compartment while the SUV was off and presumably in Arizona. That's what the prosecutors will say that was used to shoot Brandon Boudreaux. So the big difference, I think, on that case is that there is a live witness. Brandon Boudreaux was not killed. He is alive, so he can come to trial and testify about that. So I think that they will make a unique decision in that case, because it is a situation where they'll actually have a witness who was present at the scene. Now, Lori wasn't present at the scene, and no one will say she is. So there may be some pressure by the prosecutors to drop it, but I do think it'll be a unique decision. They won't just say, lost this one, therefore automatically dismiss the other case. RN2 moms, did I see the juror was texting during testimony? I did not. I did see that a juror was brought in, and I think it was not during testimony, but it was on a break. that the person was on their phone using text messages. This is what I gathered from East Idaho News, because this was not something that was available on the audio that we were able to hear or the video that we were able to hear. But the juror, because the juror was brought in and they don't want jurors being questioned, and the juror apparently, they don't want the jurors being displayed on video. So the juror was asked, hey, what was that? Because the juror had not only been on their phone, but then also had asked a pretty important, significant, lengthy question. Jurors are allowed to ask questions. And so the prosecutor said, what's up with that juror? And they brought the juror in. The juror said, yeah, I got a text from my daughter. I was just responding to her. It had nothing to do with the case. And the judge said, okay, put that phone away, no phones. And then it was left with that. So it wasn't, from the way it shook out, both sides agreed, no need to dismiss this juror from the case. Bama Queen, does it seem to you that she is trying to drag the trial out? Bama Queen, that is a great question, but I don't know that we can tell that. I don't know why she would want the trial to be longer. What would be the purpose of that? Maybe publicity, or she said she hates the prison there. So you would think she'd want to get out of there as soon as possible. It doesn't really matter for her. She's not going to leave prison, but there is some question about which prison she'll be in. So I don't know if she's really trying to drag it out, or she just doesn't know what to ask. She knows she's supposed to ask something, so she gets up and asks something, but it doesn't really move the needle any. It doesn't get the case moving forward, and I think will really seriously irritate the jury. It's already irritating the prosecutor and the judge, and may already be irritating the jury, but we won't find that out for a while. But I think it's very frustrating. All right, looking for question marks at the beginning, because that'll help me spot those. And I think there's some other people I need to head over into the super chats. Let's see, where were we? Avalon has been a member for 6 months. So glad Dad is home. Me too. And very glad to have him home. He was so happy to be headed home. He was ready to get out of there. So thank you. I appreciate Avalon, the best wishes. And Sunset Gazing has been a member for 5 months and is glad Dad is feeling better. Me too. Super happy about that. He is happy to be home. Looking forward to just being at home, just dealing with life on our own terms. So anyway, glad to have him home. So I'm going to head back over and look for a few more questions. And I'm looking for question marks at the beginning. Marley, will her prior bad acts come into this trial? I heard at one of the hearings, the judge say that he was leaning toward allowing a couple of the convictions against her to come into evidence in some form. States vary on that. I tried a case in Florida where it was carefully limited to, you could state what the conviction was for and that there was a conviction for that. And then that was it. You couldn't talk about it. In other cases, there's a lot more. You may get into some details about it, and then there may be some discussion about it. So I don't know exactly what he'll decide. He suggested 2, which would, I'm assuming, be JJ and Tylee, and that apparently he wasn't going to include Tammy Daybell. I don't know why not. I don't know all the rationale behind it, but I did hear him make that statement at a hearing. So I think some of that will come in. All right. Studio asking, are the jurors allowed to ask questions in the state? They are, and they've asked a few questions. Part of that was audio out for us that were watching on the live stream, but there were people present who talked about what some of the questions were from the jurors, and they were some interesting questions, and the judge did permit them. I don't know if he permitted all of them, but he definitely permitted some, and it was super interesting. Okay. Maria, Lori is asking questions of how Charles had specific blood wounds, etc. Oh, you think she's doing it in order to just abuse his family and to get her evil jollies? Yeah, I don't know, Maria. That would be, without question, appalling. But I don't know that that's really the reason. It doesn't seem like her questions were aimed just at that. That would be appalling if that were the reason. I hope that that's not it. I got the impression she's more just floundering, that she doesn't really know what to ask and is just throwing out questions. A lot of them had nothing to do with wounds. They were just sort of irrelevant nonsense about people's day-to-day jobs, things that did not have anything to do directly with the case, things that the judge probably would have sustained an objection on if the prosecutor had made one. I'm sure the prosecutor is trying to hold back because she doesn't want to appear to be running over Lori Vallow Daybell. She doesn't want to appear to be keeping out the truth or preventing the jury from finding out what it is that Lori Vallow Daybell actually did. She doesn't want to stand in the way of the truth. So she's probably holding back a little bit with that. And I can totally understand that. Patty B asked, why isn't she using her standby counsel? So her advisory counsel is just there to answer questions and assist her with anything as she's going forwards to understand the legal process, but not to actually prosecute or defend the case on her behalf. That's her job. So it's kind of a touchy situation. It would be a very hard role because there'd be lots of things they would want to tell her and they would have to hold back. It would actually be super frustrating. Would require the patience of Job to be that advisory counsel, I will tell you. Jean asking me, can the judge put a stop to anything if this turns into a train wreck? And yeah, the judge can stop this. The judge can certainly sustain objections if the prosecutor makes them. We saw that happen today. We saw the judge say there on that last one, apparently, because when they came back, they went to totally different questions. The judge didn't allow questions about whether or not the fire department had talked to the media or some individual within the fire department had talked to the media. So the judge can do that, can say, this is irrelevant. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to let you talk about that. I can rule it out. She definitely seems to be complying with that. She doesn't seem to be sort of a Daryl Brooks where she rides over what the judge says and, yells out things anyway. She hasn't done any of that. If the judge tells her, she complies with whatever the judge requires. So far, that's what we've seen. All right, Bethany, do her attorneys advise her about this questioning? They can advise her if she asks anything about it. For example, if she wanted to show them what her questions would be for this witness, they could look over them and say, I would change this wording or this. I mean, I don't know whether she's done that or not, but there would be nothing stopping them from answering her questions about it if she had asked them that. But I don't know that she is. Blazing, why doesn't the judge or prosecutor stop all the unnecessary and non-relevant questions? Blazing 7, I think it probably has to do with the fact that they want to give her some leeway and they don't want, particularly the prosecutor, doesn't want to appear to the jury to be overbearing and shutting her down in a way that prevents her from making her case, because that's the one thing that could really pull the jury onto Lori Vallow Daybell's side. There's a real risk here that a jury would see her as someone who was very, she's asked them, remember? And she said, you're here to protect me against that giant system out there. And the judge said, well, that's not really quite right. And that what they don't want is that dynamic developing where the jury starts to see her as someone to be protected and that this evil system is overbearing against her and trying to destroy her, just little old one individual person. So they want to avoid that. Why are jurors leaving? Traveler Landed asked. There are a couple. We weren't really given much about juror number 4, but juror number 4 disappeared today, and that was all done off the record. And then there was another juror who came in the day after selection and said, I can't make it on the money that y'all are paying, even if I get the extra amount that Arizona provides of up to $300 a day. I have child support and this and that. And I can't do that. And so I think the prosecutor said, well, yeah, why didn't anyone talk about this before? Nonetheless, the judge said, okay, and everybody agreed, okay, they would let that person go. But it is really scary. What happens if they run out of jurors is a mistrial. Unless there's some Hail Mary allowed in Arizona where everyone can agree to continue forward with 11 jurors. And I just don't know whether that would fly in a murder case. I don't know what Arizona's rules would be around that. But if you hit 12 and you lose one more, then there you are, you're out. The trial is over and you have to start over again. Be really frustrating for everyone and incredibly expensive as well. Violin is asking, do the jurors know that the children are no longer alive? I don't think that that's been said yet, but I think that they may find out at least about Tylee. I don't know though. I haven't heard any mention of it yet at trial. I don't know whether at some point though other witnesses will come with more knowledge of that. These are the EMTs and so forth. They wouldn't really have knowledge of what happened to the children. I mean, they might know it from the media, but they wouldn't have personal knowledge about that. All right, looking for question marks at the beginning so I can spot your question. Andrea asking, can they bring another juror in at the last minute? No, they cannot. This is it. That's why you have alternates, and technically more alternates is better. I bet you if they do end up trying this again, they'll have a lot more alternates next time because, oh, what a nightmare. And Bolshevik Muppet asking about the jurors today. There were various things that happened with jurors. There was the one who was texting. There was the one who disappeared for reasons not really explained to us, number 4. And then there was another juror who was brought in. A lot of this, we don't know all the details. But 2 jurors, they brought them in and like, yeah, that's okay. You can stay. And so it didn't end up affecting the trial. And I imagine they'll make some real efforts to make sure they keep as many as possible in. Okay, Veronica Lass, what would she have to say to open the door to allow testimony of the fact she is convicted of her crimes? I think the judge said he was going to allow it in. So I think we're going to see at least a couple of them from what he said presented, but I don't know his exact ruling. That was something I heard him say at a hearing. All right, SW asking what happened with the juror. It's hard to know. Let me tell you exactly what I had written down. No, that was juror questions. Okay. Day 1, we lost a juror, the one who said it's too expensive. I can't make it on this money. Then today, juror 4 was brought in and there was no explanation. They just, they were dismissed. Juror 16 said he may have seen a YouTube video on the case in the past. And apparently when he saw the video that was presented on day 1 of trial, it kind of jogged his memory like, oh, I think I saw that before. So the issue then became that the prosecution had played it with audio off on some of it. For example, what Tylee said has been ruled out. So that wasn't allowed in. What Lori said will be allowed in, but not what Tylee was allowed in. So did he maybe hear what Tylee said when he heard the version of it before? Probably he did. But so the question was, they went through, did YouTube suggest this? And was it like from the algorithm but the bottom line was everyone agreed that this juror could stay, even though it was possible. He didn't seem to remember a lot about this video, but it was possible he had seen it before. And then juror number 15 came in and he was the one seen on his phone and was then asked a pretty detailed question about one of the issues in the case, because jurors are allowed to ask the witnesses questions. And the juror said, yeah, I was just texting my daughter. The judge said, okay, no, remember, no phones, put the phone away. And that juror also was retained. So at this point, we're down 2, and 2 have had some questions around it, but there have not been nothing has happened that's actually removed them from the case. They're still there, but it's scary. It's a really small number for such an important and such a really serious case like this, a murder trial, and nobody wanting to try it again a second time. And I would put Lori Vallow Daybell in that because she knows she's in prison for life, barring something happening. And she doesn't like this prison. She wants to go back to Idaho for whatever reason. She thought it was a better prison. Okay. Looking for last question over here, last question or so. We're going to be live again tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern, by the way. Are the jurors sequestered? I don't believe so, Andrea. I don't think so. I think they go home to families every night, but they're not to talk to their families about anything that they've heard at the trial. Suzanne, did Lori opened the door to Idaho when she got the answer from the firefighter about him reviewing his testimony from Idaho and Chandler. Interesting question. He did throw in that word. Now that you mention it, I recall that, but I don't think that would open the door because it was from his answer. It wasn't specifically anything related to a trial against her. It just, he testified there. So I don't think that the court would rule that that went so far as to open the door. I think he's going to allow some kind of limited discussion about the 2 convictions. He said 2. He said inclined to do 2. So we will find out. I don't know his final ruling on that. I don't know if he's even made the final ruling yet. All right. Well, tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, we will be live again. Thank you to our mods, Marlon and Mama Pinks, and I will see you tomorrow.